My name is Lucy Wilson Kear. I am the founder and one of the hosts of the Liberian View. Today, we're going to be discussing the role and impact of the diaspora, Liberia's 2023 election. We have two panelists. We have Mr. Kawi JJ and we have Mr. Emmerich Nicole and other speakers and members of the Liberian View. We have Reverend Dr. Edwin Lloyd, and then we have one of our team members, Mr. Felix Wilson. Having said that, and our speaker today is Mr. Gregory Simskin. He will be introduced by our own Reverend Dr. Edwin Lloyd. But before that, I just want to give you a little synopsis regarding the purpose of the Liberian View. The Liberian View, it was made to discuss the historical, social, economic, legal, educational, relational, developmental, religious, and tribal issues that are barriers to the growth and development of Liberia by unlocking Liberia's past, understanding the present, and working towards building a brighter and better future. The Liberian View panel discussions bring together scholars, professionals, business leaders, well-meaning Liberians and friends, doers and thinkers, to include folks whose ideas form bridge to a lasting future from all sections and sectors of our population and the world at large, to have a logical and balanced discussion and thereby seek solutions that will foster progress, unity, and healing. The Liberian View does not ascribe to any political agenda, partisan ideology. Our goal is to create intellectual environment that embraces dialogue devoid of fallacious attack. It is expected that our panelists, our guests, and our participants will exercise graciously mutual respect and professionalism during this discussion. We want to take this time to welcome you, and then we're going to turn it over to our own Dr. J. Edwin Lloyd to introduce our guest speaker. And after that, you'll be hearing the voice of our two panelists. First, we're going to go to Mr. Kawi JJ after the introduction of our guest speaker, and thank you all.
Great to all. We are glad to gather together once more on this Liberian View Forum uh, to discuss issues relative uh, to our common heritage, and also to be able to learn and exchange ideas when it comes to the policy decisions of our nation and the development prospects that we all envisage. We are glad to have Mr. Gregory Simpkins, who is a very knowledgeable and experienced policy development analyst or professional. And he has vast experience working with the various situations that deal with Africa and the world at large. So he's very knowledgeable, and we're glad to have him in our midst at this moment. Um, Mr. Simpkins is a specialist in African policy development. He's the founder and president of the 21st Century Solutions, which began as 21st Century Concepts in 2003. He worked in helping U.S. law firms and consulting firms relate more effectively with the African clients. He also served as managing director and chief operating officer of the Morgantour Sterling consulting firm, where he manages program development and implementation. While in the U.S. government, he most recently served as senior advisor in the Africa Bureau at the U.S. Agency for International Development, focusing on trade, especially helping the agency assume operational management of the presidential initiative Prosper Africa. He previously served as staff director for the U.S. House Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and international organizations from 2011 to 2018. where he also advised the chairman on policy issues, arranged congressional hearings, drafted legislations, and led government oversight missions related to Africa. During his two previous terms on the same subcommittee from 1997 to 1998 and 2005 to 2006, um, Mr. Simpkins helped pass the initial version of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, and several subsequent versions. In between his terms of government service, Mr. Simpkins trained political party activists and election observers from several countries and observed elections in Liberia, in Kenya, Equatorial Guinea, and South Africa. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from George Washington University and his Master of Business Administration, specialized in marketing, from the Keller Graduate School of Management. Fellow ladies and gentlemen, fellow Liberians and guests, it is an utmost pleasure for me to present to you now Mr. Gregory Simpkins. Mr. Simpkins.
Well,
Okay, we go ahead. We just want to say thank you for that introduction. As we stated, the introduction is already done. We're gonna turn it over to the two of our panelists to look at like this particular topic, the role and impact of the diaspora when it comes to Liberia's 2023 election. They're gonna be accentuating the economics, education, whichever way when it comes to the infrastructure development, healthcare framework, clean water, electricity, job creation. What is important? What would be the role of the diaspora when you're electing, or when you're casting your vote, or when you're monitoring, or when you are educating individuals regarding this election? What would be the role? So we're going to turn this over to one of our panelists, Mr. Kawi JJ, who will start the ball rolling when it comes to our role. And then we'll have Mr. Emmerich Nico, who would also discuss, and then we'll turn it over to our guest speaker, who will summarize and then tell us the important and our role when it comes to the election with his vast experiences. So, Mr. Kawi JJ, the floor is yours. And thank you
thank,
so much, Reverend Dr. Edwin Lloyd, for such introduction.
thank you, Madam Kear. Thanks, Dr. Lloyd, and thanks to all of us for being here today. It's an honor to be given this opportunity to discuss issues impacting Liberia. And from the onset, when I spoke about, my passion, and that heavily includes Liberia and how people like us can be able to, be impactful in terms of our actions, in terms of what we bring, the diversity we bring when it comes to growth in Liberia as well. So it is an honor to be here with Mr. Simpkins as well, and all of you. But one of the things that continues to, make me to stay up at night. There's this saying that say in Liberia, we always say that this is like, an important moment for the country. We're at a crossroad, right? And so it seems like every time we do that. But looking at the 2023 election, I think this is a pivotal moment in terms of how we move the country into an era of globalization. And so when we look at the poor infrastructures we have, when we look at the economic challenges that we face as a nation, all of these things can be tied to leadership. So in terms of the diaspora and how it should, how it can help bring some sort of change or some sort of, impact to that election is, I will start with number one, voters' education. I think there is a massive need, a huge need for educating those who will be making that decision. Because when you see the trend in terms of electing individuals to leadership, there is a complete disconnect. And I think over the years and from time in time, we have not really done a good job when it comes to educating our people, when it comes to civics, when it comes to the essence of leadership, when it comes to decision making, why they, voting for people to represent them, right? So the diaspora can be very helpful in that aspect by making sure it is, helping to infuse resources and empower people who can go across different towns and villages to talk to people in the dialects, in the local languages, and just educate them about the continued economic hardships that they face. Something like healthcare, for the most part, we see this issue with JFK, and which is one of the largest hospitals in the country. But we see that because there's so much of a poor infrastructure and process at JFK, that tends to impact people in those rural areas that do not have access to main Liberia, which is the urban area you're talking about, the Monserrato, that we have a lot of government activities as well. So it is very key for us to focus on educating those voters and letting them know that the essence of going to the poll is not just being associated or affiliated with political parties. It is about understanding the platforms of each of those individuals that are selling themselves, right? And then looking at their pressing needs, the current needs that they face: education, healthcare, job, unemployment, and seeing how best they can find the most qualified to be able to help in that area as well. But, young people, I remain passionate about. And the diaspora right now should start looking like at Liberia from that standpoint. That the majority of our voting population, right, are young people, and they also happen to be the most marginalized group in our body of politics and in our country. So now, how can we empower those young people to be the messengers of hope, but to also understand the context and concept of leadership and the essence, the value addition that they bring when it comes to actually voting during the next election? And so, all of those components, I believe, are vital pieces, crucial pieces that are needed in terms of the diaspora resources, and the resources that come from the monetary aspect of things and even the professionalism as well, because we have a lot of experts in the diaspora who are still in those different areas. How can we combine all of those things and create a collective efforts that helps, to move, us in that direction as well? So, Madam Kia, just to summarize, and then Emery can come in from here. I think those are the crucial points that we need to take into consideration, and the reason why that 2023 is a pivotal period, and the urgent need for diaspora involvement should be looked at, from that, the professional financial standpoint, but also how they can galvanize resources to be able to impact directly voters, young people, women, and children, in terms of leadership as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. JJ. I think Mr. JJ stressed on the need for voters registration and the need to look at the marginalized young adults and young people in Liberia. I just want to, before I turn it over to Mr. Emmerich, I was wondering um, whether Mr. Felix, do you have any questions or any questions to us that you think you want to ask? Any comment?
Not at the moment, Madam Chair. I'm taking notes and reserve my questions for later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so we'll turn it over to our next panelist, Mr. Emmerich. The floor is yours, sir.
Right, great discussion with someone with the experience of going back home to help out after living in the U.S. for more than 2 decades. I was in Liberia. I thought about giving back. So I'm going to be more practical over here for our people to actually understand how people in the diaspora community can help back home. If you look at our society is a society that the activities we have are based on consumption. And then most of the activities of people in the diaspora have been carrying out in Liberia is goods that people just consume. So it had not moved the needles in any way. We have not made any big strides, any big achievement over there. The people are still suffering because the government had not found a way to impact or to encourage or attract more people to go and invest into the country. So the way I see it is we have to move from the consumption stage to productivity. Africa cannot grow if we don't produce. Simple as that. Simple economics. Production stage is going to create more jobs. It's going to help to create more jobs. People are idle. The young people are idle back home because the lack of activities back home to create jobs for them. So the way I see it is we have to move from consuming, just consuming, to carry on production, and that there where the middle class, the diaspora community can fit in to that in that gap. We see we have financial capital, we have intellectual capital, we have social capital because being exposed to different walks, different cultures, and there where I think we can bring that back home. And to bring that back home, our government will have to recognize the strength of the diaspora community. Our government will have to create policies. Our government will have to make it so simple, especially when it comes to information. The flow of information, this is how you attract people from the diaspora. Without the diaspora community right now, we are stagnant. We are stagnant because one, the people back home, our people back home cannot afford even getting a loan from the bank. And it's a true statement. But in the diaspora community, our government can tap into the diaspora community, but the intellectual capital, the financial capital, to see how they can create, they can craft policy to fit the diaspora community into that gap that will bring the middle class, and the middle class, small businesses. That's what can actually make any economy to grow. So it's about time that we realize in Africa, in Liberia specifically, why you are going to vote, why you are thinking about the leadership in Liberia. If you don't put in the leadership that will understand the link, the importance of the diaspora community, will remain the same way, the same old, and go nowhere. So it's up to you over there, the young people. I'm here to encourage you. And I will say again, there's a lot that the diaspora do not underestimate the power of the diaspora community. It's happening in so many African countries. Ethiopia, those places are not developing by mistake. Kenya, not by mistake. The flow of money from the diaspora community is a lot. Even in Liberia, millions of dollars, the remission. We remit so much money back home, but we can't always be about consumption. We have to find a way to get into the production sector to be able to boom the economy. So as we go forward, I'll be able to tell how the social capital, the intellectual capital, the financial capital are going to impact Liberia from the diaspora community.
Okay, thank you so much. I was just wondering because I know that um, for us in the diaspora, I do not know whether the government of Liberia currently have any framework or structure regarding our role. Do you think any one of you can answer? Do you think that the diaspora need to take the initiative to start thinking and developing a framework regarding their participation, or should we wait for the government to let us know how we can participate?
Yeah, if I can chime in quickly on that part, and thanks to Emric for bringing that part up. Emric referenced Ethiopia there, and interesting. I was just reading a study through High State University that spoke highly of that diaspora and how they were able to gain some sort of traction to bring some sort of economic development to that country. But specifically to your question, I want to reference Rwanda. And so, what Rwanda has done is to simplify things in terms of business. And so, yes, the diaspora can come up with ideas and ways to create policies, right? But it comes with establishing the kind of environment, the economic environment that embraces, that welcomes, right, the diaspora. And as it stands, one of the challenges and the barriers that I see is the ease of doing business. And so the record time of doing business in Rwanda compared to Liberia is just completely night and day. So in Rwanda, there's an easy process. diasporans or Rwandans in the diaspora who are going to invest in the country will go there, and no corruption, no headaches, no extra payments from them, and just go straight right and get business done. And their taxation, right, opportunities to encourage them, incentives to encourage them to become active participants when it comes to investing in the economy. In Liberia, we are plagued. We face a situation where the government does not have not only policies or does not have anything right that welcomes you and I in terms of the diaspora. So then, I think the trend of thought now becomes right. How can we create a suitable environment? Because yes, the private sector is key, but you don't build the private sector where you don't have the kind of policies to attract. And I know this because that's part of my experience. And these are the things I've been fortunate in my little career to work through some of the tough economic crisis in America, and I see how policies were able to drive results. And some of those policies, by the way, we have to run through them. Right? It's just pass through and right there get on that. So great question. But while it is true that the diaspora can come up with something in terms of working document, but it has to come directly from the country and the leadership as well. What are you doing to be able to attract diaspora Liberians or Liberians in the diaspora to become active participant when it comes to building the private sector, something that is vastly needed? I just wanted to chime in on that as well.
Yeah, let me just add on that.
Go ahead.
Oh, you see information, right? If you have information readily accessible, it's one of the things. You said in the US, people can go online and just Google stuff and read about how to be able to establish a business or so. One of the things that I see hindering that process in Liberia, information is not readily accessible in our country. To even get information, because people in the diaspora, they don't have, you want reliability. You don't want to call orally and find out from someone by word of mouth or so and say this is how to do this. Why can't it be? We have technology, the widespread usage of technology right now. We are not utilizing it. Without technology right now, the word, that's how you move the world, that's how you move any country, any nation. We have not taken advantage of it. And it's just one of the reasons why we're not moving forward, because information is not readily available, accessible to the diaspora community. And I think the government will have to do something about it to see how they can disseminate the information that people can go and read to be able to mitigate some of the risk involved if you are uninformed.
Okay, part of this discussion actually is going to be focusing on how we can come about as a team to develop some framework and some structure in place as it relates to the election and what will be our role. Is one either the diaspora coming together and taking and formulating a framework as to our participation. Two, to wait for the government also that will be participating and being a candidate within this particular 2023 election. So can someone just chime in to see? I know that Mr. Kawi JJ spoke about voters education. I'm sure the government may have their own form and the election commissioner or maybe the government as to how they're going to educate the Liberian people through the various dialects, traveling to the interior, different counties and different areas within our country. But is that sufficient?
Yeah,
Madam Chair.
thanks,
Go
madam.
ahead. Go ahead,
Madam
Felix.
Kear. Oh,
Felix.
okay. I'll wait for
Go ahead,
Felix.
Felix.
Yeah, Felix.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in a little bit. I would stop with a question to both of JJ and Emery, and that is, it's great what I've heard so far in terms of what we can do to help the country. But I'm one who like to state things as they are, and one of the things is we are not united as Liberians, and in order to have the impact that we want to have, that's a problem. That's a weakness we have to strengthen. Um, for years now, we've looked for the government to put in place strategies to uh, bring about or to engage the diaspora, right? and the strength and benefits they can get from engagement with the diaspora. That has not happened. That does not preclude us in the diaspora from engaging with the government. But the problem is we are not united. And I think until we get to that point where we can put down our egos, and I'm talking about all of the organizations, hundreds or if not thousands of organizations in the diaspora, and even as individuals, right? And until we can put that down and come together and really focus on the needs of our country, it's going to be a difficult thing to pull off. So my question to the two of you, Emery and JJ, is what? Hopefully, you've thought about this, right? What one strategy we could do as Liberians living in the diaspora, right, to bring about this unity that we need to have the impact we need to have. And let me just remind you, being united as Liberians in the diaspora, especially in the United States of America, does not only influence Liberia, it gives us strength in numbers to influence Congress. Madam Kear is a living witness of that because she and her group were very impactful with the DV program when we got that extended a year or two back. So, what one strategy either of you have thought of or can think of that we could implement to bring about the thousands, hundreds of thousands of Liberians that are living here that have benefited educationally? Um, we have the power, but we got to be together. So, to you,
Uh,
either of you.
Yeah, well, so great, great input by you, and thanks for the question as well. For me, I thrive based upon positivity, right? And so I'm a strong believer that adversity breeds strength. And if you look at challenges, there are opportunities. So one thing that I like to do is to also realize wherein or be very upfront of the successes that we've had. So I don't think there's any kind of disunity, right? There are problems, there's challenges. But I think though, there's been time wherein we've been unified. I'll take you back to the Civil War. Liberians in the diaspora played a key role in, seeking help from the international community, United States, to intervene. And over time, if you really look at the crisis in Liberia, it has been because of diaspora Liberians. Now, there is an era of opportunity wherein we have to start looking at how can we leverage the diversity that we bring to be able to have a larger impact. And I think one of the strategy will have to be that, reaching across that, we need to talk to each other more often and just reduce the political barriers, reduce the fights, and just see one another as individuals with different opinions. That regardless of what opinions I have, there's an opportunity of growth in that opinion that I can leverage for us to be able to find that common ground. So one of the strategies is to find that commonality. What is it that Felix wants, right? That I see benefits me, or that if when we come together, we can be able to leverage that to be able to effectuate change. And I see that every day just working with young people. There are challenges because, mind you, I'm being looked at as this young guy in the diaspora who's not a Liberian, right? Trust me, those comments come from people who you're trying to help. But I understand though that if I were placed in that same position, it's possible that I may have looked at things a little bit. So, what do I do to bridge that gap and to possibly find a way to change the narrative? And those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves, right? Okay, yes, this is being said. What can I do to change that perspective? In terms of the economics in Liberia and small business, one of the biggest challenge when it comes to growth in Liberia is the private sector. To this day, we have not found a way to absorb, right, in terms of unemployment by building the private sector. Government still accounts for the larger majority of unemployment, employment in that country. But truthfully speaking, those people are not even getting on time. So if the diaspora can come together and find that commonality and say, you know what? Felix is strong in this, Emmerich is this. Let's remove the political barriers and let's find a way to be able to engage each other. I think those are strategies that can be effective, and just tapping into our strengths to be able to create some sort of movements when it comes to Liberia as well. So if I see you and we have some sort of political disagreements and we don't, work within the confines of the same parties, but I can respect you knowing that you are an expert in your field. You bring a lot of value, and there's something that I can tap into, and there's something that you can tap into, and all of us can see professionalism as that bridge, right? That brings us together and kind of lessen the divide, but we can work that. And I do that across during the day. Finally, I do that throughout the day, weeks, months. I work along with people who are from different side. I speak to people who are from different political parties, different political constructs. Sometimes we have heated battles and arguments, right? But I respect the fact that all of us have a unique diversity, and within that diversity and the disagreements, there are opportunities that we can move or use to be able to move forward as well.
Right. I'm going to add, Mr. Wilson. I think most of our conversation, our discussion, are all politically charged. I think if we depoliticize the environment, one, and we become tolerant and respectful, okay, depoliticize, become respectful, tolerant, and then another thing, detribalize, our interaction. We're going to achieve a lot, because one thing I see, and you 100% right, it's not easy for us to work together as a group of people. It's almost impossible. In fact, it's one of the main barriers I've seen in the Liberian communities. We don't work together. We don't work well together. We will gang up as maybe people from certain settlements or certain tribes, and so, and that's something that we will not come and sugarcoat. We can't hide it. We have to speak about it. So my thing to see how we can detribalize, depoliticize, and see how we can be tolerant, because typical Liberian way, when you think you have reached or you got two or three masters, is to be used. I'm not saying everyone, to put people who don't know, to put them down. And to me, that's wrong. And once you do that, people built this barrier, this shield around them. They try to protect themselves because they think you are only there to demean them, to disparage them. And once people get defensive, it's not easy to talk to them. It's not easy to have a conversation. So in the diaspora community, I'm saying we depoliticize the issue. One, we become tolerant, we become respectful. When you do that, you give people the opportunity now to welcome you in, to allow you. And the only way you can have, these issues resolved is when you are able to talk. But first of all, we don't talk to each other. It's because you support CDC and I support ANC. We don't talk because already we are charged. So we have to understand that is taken away from us. And that's one way to resolve it, to depoliticize, detribalize, to be tolerant, to be respectful. Thank you.
Madam Kear, if you can just give me 1 minute quickly to, there's
Go
something
ahead.
I missed. And, Mr. Wilson, and to all other Liberians here and following, the feed on Facebook. One thing that I've noticed the most, and that goes to your question, Mr. Wilson, is that, successful Liberians are not really, for the most part, engaged in the community. I think it is time that Liberians who have been fortunate, blessed to achieve some level of success, need to find it in their hearts to mentor other Liberians, young people. There's so many young people there who have experiences, but could actually take the next level in the personal career. If that person who's already successful in the community can reach and say, you know what, it's going to be my responsibility to find potential talents and young people and talk to them and see how best I can give or breathe something into them. That alone, I think, is what is some of the challenge, or one of the biggest challenge we face. Because if you go in the Nigerian community, I tell you, there's several doctors at different universities and actually institutions there. And guess what they're doing? They're pouring back into young people in that community. You see, they show up at events. They show up to, international forums. They reach out to these young people to see potential, and they're investing into them, right, through mentorship. What are we doing to find the next young person who's vibrant, who we see some sort of potential in, and how are we using our gifts to breathe life into them and tell them, you know what, I see a potential in you. I'm going to take upon myself to see how best I can guide you to get to where you need to be. And just remember that just as I'm doing it for you, do that for your country, or do that for the next young man as well. I think it's something that we really need to take a look at and see how best we can be more involved in our community and start impacting the lives of potential young people, and young people are Liberians as well, in Liberia as well, to be able to realize the dream and aspirations as well. That's another way we can be able to break those barriers and actually prepare a different generation of Liberians that will be able to face those obstacles and see things in a different manner.
Thank you so much. I think you all, both of you, really stressed the mean barriers that we've been facing in decades. I remember, and I was told during the 50s and 60s, and we had only the Liberian Community Association. Now we've given birth to county association, as you all stated. County association. We have the high school alumni association. So we sectionize ourselves in various boxes, and then getting out of those boxes, what has really made it worse? Our political affiliations, our political dream, and who we want. Actually, because and when you look at all these things, people are actually not looking at Liberia. What does Liberia want? And so you guys have really, really, really dealt with the issue that is separating us. And then what will be our role when we have these barriers? What will be the diaspora impact when we have these barriers? And I like what both of you said, especially reaching across to other political, your young adults who are in very different political groupings. How can you reach across and find your common ground and talk and think Liberia? I think that's so important. So separate and apart from voters education, um, the most important thing is the diaspora coming together. But I know in time past, and any of my colleagues can chime in, this has been a problem. This is the problem we identified. We know the problem. So what is next? How can we solve this, or how can we solve the problem? If you're reaching across the aisle to various political parties, various tribal groups, and bringing other professionals together, can we start a little group to discuss this issue and find our role, our role and our impact? Are we going to go ahead and say, okay, fine, the government needs help? We've seen what they're doing. They've done this, they've done that. The election commission also, we went out online, we read their guidelines, we see what is lacking or what is needed. Is it something that we can come together, separate and apart from our tribal affiliations? Can we come together and work towards actually creating a framework or structure as to how the role of the diaspora and our impact when it comes to this 2023 election? Because as far as the Liberian View is concerned, this is not about political party. This is about what Liberia needs, the kind of healthcare system we need, the fact that people need to take pay, the fact that coming against, paying someone's school fee because they're a young little girl, not looking at them as a child or as a little sister, but trying to manipulate them, abuse them because you're doing something. These are the things that we need to look at and then vote Liberia. So having said that, we'll just pause a little bit, and our guest speaker has already been introduced. It's about 5:32. We're just giving the floor to come in, and then from there we can ask questions. Panelists and everyone else can ask questions, and we can chime in. We want to say thank you so much to Kawi and to Emmerich. It has not yet ended, but we just want to give Gregory the opportunity to come and give us what he thinks from as an American and someone who has vast knowledge in the various areas, especially when it comes to monitoring and engaging elections. Mr. Gregory, the floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your broadcast. I must say that over the more than 40 years I've worked on Africa issues, the first Africans I've ever encountered were Liberians. So I have a special place in my heart for Liberia, having also gone there, having worked on legislation about Liberia, having observed elections there, trained observers. I have a personal stake in Liberia that's longstanding. Now, I want to give you a presentation in two parts. The first is a community outreach plan for Liberians. This is a version of this was presented to Eritreans in the diaspora, Rwandans, Nigerians, and I think it works. The second part is specifically about the election, because I think you start here with doing the community outreach, and I hope that I can explain to you how that works in helping to safeguard the elections. I've prayed that our Lord gives me the wisdom to tell you what you need to know, and that I express it in a way that's understandable. So, with that, let me just start by saying that African born Americans have become increasingly politically active in the United States, especially Ethiopians and Liberians. Using the numbers in selected cities and states and towns, these African born citizens approach office holders to press issues of concern, those specific to their local communities here, and those relating to conditions in your homeland that they want U.S. officials to help to address. You start with the local, you go to the national, and then the international. Now, in order to make this work, Liberian Americans must find out where the political pressure points are and utilize them to their best advantage. The following is a 10-point plan for Liberians to follow to accomplish their greatest level of influence. Now, I'm going to summarize this because I could use up all my time just talking about this. But first, you need to determine and list accurately the areas of Liberian concentration in America. The Liberian communities are large, but their areas of concentration must be properly identified, and only Liberians can accurately gauge that. You know who the other Liberians are and where they are, and who are the notable people. You don't have to have a lot of people necessarily, but you have to have influential people, because in part two, you have to identify community leaders in those identified areas. Political power comes not just through sheer numbers, but also through the influence of established persons such as doctors, lawyers, professors. They engender respect such that when they speak on subjects, people listen, including office holders. They likely have followings beyond the Liberian community that can be leveraged to influence uh, uh, for influence purposes. Three, you have to identify members of Congress associated with the designated areas. While state and local officials can be important to your cause locally, it is congressional officials who determine foreign policy through laws, statements of policy, or financing of federal programs. Your embassy has contacts within the House Foreign Affairs and Senate Foreign Relations committees, but Liberian Americans need champions outside those panels, which are often focused on issues other than Liberia or even the continent's West African region. Four, you have to send prominent Liberian small groups, 2 to 3 people, to meet with identified congressional home offices and those of local officials. These groups, led by the designated local leader who has agreed to perform in this capacity, should include no more than 2 other credible, prominent people in the community. That could be somebody who's young, by the way, who's accomplished, who's well known and respected. The message should use agreed upon organizational talking points to be consistent and effective. You need to write up op-eds and letters to the editor on the editorial pages of local papers, linking Liberian interest with American interest. American elected officials quite rightly see themselves as representing American interest, and they have to be shown why those interests coincide with Liberian interests. They need to be shown this, as does the general public. Such questions of coincidence of interest will inevitably be raised, and your friends in public office and your neighbors should clearly understand why you seek their help and why they should provide it. 6, you must identify gatekeepers in local communities and utilize them. Gatekeepers are people who reflect views to and from the community. They may be barbers, hairdressers, people working at community centers, etc. They come in contact with people all day, every day. If you can approach them with easy to understand ideas that make sense to them, they can repeat your talking points because they agree with you and accept them. Conversely, they can tell you what people in the broader community think so you can fashion your arguments accordingly. 7, you have to establish contacts with local churches and faith-based organizations that can provide platforms to reach broader audiences, largely through using churches as venues for public or organizational meetings. They're also the key to organizing humanitarian assistance to support or replace government humanitarian aid, be that Liberian government or American or EU or whomever. Americans are among the most generous people in the world and will donate to help others in need if they understand what's called for and how assistance will be safely and effectively provided. Of course, church leaders also are gatekeepers who can reflect messages back and forth, but their influence and credibility goes beyond the gatekeepers who are service providers. 8, Liberians should attend community meetings to establish and burnish their credentials as Americans of Liberian origin. These meetings allow for Liberians to demonstrate that they care about and are involved in community concerns. In these settings, Liberians can validate their expertise and role in the community. By doing so, they establish their dual set of interests that can be presented as not only being completely foreign to an American audience. For example, who better than Liberians can relate the dangers of community disunity, as was discussed before? If you are shown to be one of the people, you can successfully present an idea that is not yet common to everyone. 9, using contacts and platforms previously established, you should conduct election forums to discuss issues of concern. Questions should center on local concerns, but offers an opportunity to mix in national and international issues. Not focusing on Liberian issues merely as Liberian issues allows other citizens to see these concerns as part of the larger whole, legitimizing them as worthy concerns for anyone, whether you are Liberian, West African, just internationalist in orientation, or merely an average citizen. These forums, when convened before election primaries, allows you to see who is informed on or not on your issues and who is most likely to at least try to understand your concerns. And 10, before the primaries and general elections and thereafter, you must promote responsive politicians by contributing to their campaigns monetarily and through working to get them elected. They remember who helped them, and such efforts can result in Liberians being appointed to positions of influence and authority that can further bolster the community. I should point out that in the Biden administration, there are a lot of Africans who were appointed when the president took office last year. Most of them were Nigerian. I don't recall very many Liberians who were part of that. Now, it's a little late for this election year because we only have a little more than a week, but elections happen every 2 years. And in fact, they happen in off years as well in some states. So just because it's late for 2022 doesn't mean you shouldn't start planning for 2023, 2024, and etc. And also, I want to make the point that when you visit local offices, you're seen, I'm talking about local offices of the Congress, you're seen as a voter. When you approach them in Washington, you're an advocate. They see advocates all the time. When you go as a voter, they listen to you because they don't want to lose your vote and the vote of people that you know. So it's more important not to come to Washington. You can come to Washington. I'm not saying don't, but it's more important and more effective that you go where they live and that you write op-eds and everything in the papers where they read in their own communities, because that moves people in the community who can help you to move them. Now, the second part I want to talk about the election concerns. Now, once you've gotten together and you come up with plans for how you want to help the election. And this is regardless of party. Everybody should want a free and fair election, a transparent election, an effective election, so that at the end of the election, you know who won and you have confidence that they actually are the people who are supposed to be in office. So I would suggest to you that in this, here's the whole election process. Every part of this is important. First of all, we talked about voter registration earlier. If voters aren't registered fairly and effectively, major sections of the electorate can be excluded, which would disadvantage a party or a candidate. This has happened in numerous countries in Africa and elsewhere, where a party may be very popular, but if a large part of their voters can't get a voter ID card, they can't vote. If they can't vote, you've already started the process of losing. Then there's delimitation of constituencies. People often forget this, but voting districts can be created that make one party more likely to win a greater number of constituencies and therefore more legislative seats. Moreover, it also matters more if electoral law calls for a certain number of constituencies to be won, as in a presidential race. Then there's political party registration. When new political parties are unable to become registered, that party's supporters may find themselves without a satisfactory political home, and many such voters may decide not to vote at all. Then there are the election rules. Rules governing the election process must be clear and fair to all parties and candidates, and contestants must observe these rules for the process to work. It's vital for election observers, monitors, to know the rules under which they can operate at polling places. Understanding these rules from the beginning contributes to the likelihood of free and fair elections. Having somebody sitting in a polling place without knowing what they're doing is worse than not having anybody at all, because it implies that somebody watched this and thought the process was okay. It may not be. They may be sitting there watching the election being stolen, not knowing what's going on. So when it's all over, the party who won, who may have cheated, can say, well, we had observers, they didn't have any problem with it. So it's important that the observers know what they're doing. Now, polling places where people cast their ballots must be secure, and the voting process must be completely observable without points at which a voter can be manipulated or interfered with surreptitiously. I've seen that in places. I was in Equatorial Guinea, and in the eastern part, one polling place that was in an old bombed out theater, and people would be sent to the back room to cast their ballots, supposedly in secret. But in reality, somebody from outside could influence them. They could lean in and talk to them. They can give them a pre-marked ballot. You have to make sure that it's completely secure. Election observers and monitors. Great care must be taken to select dependable people to observe elections, whether they're called observers or monitors under the law. They must know what they can and cannot do and what the limits on their actions are under the law, not because of the whims of a local election official. Alternates should be selected and registered to account for observers using the restroom or taking refreshment or just simply being ill. By the way, lunch should be provided so that no observer must walk miles to get anything to eat or drink and miss any part of the voting process. Ballot counting. Ballots are supposed to be numbered and correspond to the number of registered voters in the constituency. There should be extra ballots to account for damaged or spoiled ballots. That is, somebody mismarks the ballot and they ask for another ballot to replace the one that they messed up. And also, election officials and security personnel under the law often are allowed to vote where they are stationed. So that means theoretically you can have more votes than registered voters, but not many more votes. Anytime you see 100% or more voting in any election anywhere, suspect something. That's rarely happened in life. Not here, not England, not France, Germany, nowhere. It doesn't happen. 100% of the people voting. Doesn't happen. That's a fantasy. However, there should, as I said, it never should be more than a certain number. The observers or monitors also have to be careful to watch that numbers aren't transposed. This is something I have taught observers throughout the continent. That, for example, a vote of 560 transposed to 650 over repeated constituencies will lead to a false outcome. So you have to be very careful of that. Certification of the results. The agreed upon count at the polling place must be matched the tally at the regional counting center and the national vote tally center. I've been in post-election situations in Liberia and other places. I have to tell you, it was excruciating that night when I was watching the ballot counting in the regional center, because if it's not organized, it can take a heck of a long time. You start off early in the morning going to different election places. Who wants to be there till after midnight? Where people fooling around and delaying and all that kind of stuff. But you got to watch the people counting the ballots, and you have to pay attention to what did they say at the polling place. Is that exactly the same as what we are looking at here? And you have to look at the numbers of the ballots, all of that. The network, there should be a network of observers, as I've seen in countries like Kenya, for example, and they have to communicate with each other. So everybody knows what all of the constituencies reported, and the observers shouldn't sign off unless they feel certain that's the correct number. Contesting election results. The process for this must be fully understood in advance and agreed upon. Unfair or inefficient and ineffective procedures on contesting elections could result in the loss of a challenge that need not happen. Legal assistance must be lined up in advance for rapid response, and issues concerning any part of the process must be lodged in advance of voting. If you have a problem with the way it's set up, you should say that even before people vote. I'll give you an example. In Ethiopia in 2005, there were 3 parties to hear any election petition: the ruling party, the complaining party, and the election officials who are appointed by the government. So right there, it's 2-1. How many of these do you think were successful by the petitioning party? Very, very few, if any. So I would say that you have until next year. You should organize now to help folks. I think the suggestion was made earlier by one of the panelists that people of goodwill in America who are born in Liberia and want to help Liberia should put together their funds to promote a free and fair election process, as well as organize people here, because you're going to need people who are ready to talk to members of Congress, governor's offices, state legislatures, etc., to say this wasn't a good election. This is what's happening. You don't want to leave it to demonstrations in Washington. You want to have people all over the country prepared to understand that this is going in a bad direction. This is going in a good direction. We, as Americans of Liberian origin, care about what's happening, and we hope you care as well. So with that, I'll take any questions anybody has.
Wow. Thank you so much, Gregory. This was very good community outreach plan for Liberia. And then he talked about the election, gave us, I think I'm refreshed when it comes to exactly what needs to be done, how we need to put our group together. But as stated, Gregory is asking if you have question. Now the floor is for anyone if you want to ask a question or you just want to chime in. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Simpkins, that was powerful, and I'm grateful that you were able to share your not only your expertise but the passion, and that special connection you have for Liberia. You did re-echo the essence of being organized and being effective and not waiting to the last minute. What I want to ask you about is this: one of the success story when it comes to democracy, when it comes to a community that's faced challenges, the African American communities, and we've seen the civil rights movement that we see have Reverend R. Sharpton and others have actually been able to mend the fences and actually carried on that particular legacy. When you think of Liberia and Liberians, especially with some of the risks and some of the challenges to face, what are those things that you think, from an organizer standpoint, of just your understanding of that particular era, that could be essential in making sure we're a strong body and we're creating movements and relationships that last, and actually extending legacies when it comes to our democracy, when it comes to our community activism as well?
Well, for one thing, I remember some time ago I was at a Liberian forum here in America, and this was before the 2007 elections. Was it 2007? And there were people who were saying, "Well, look, America, why don't you just take over the elections and run the elections for us?" No, 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 no. This is a Liberian issue and should be handled by Liberians. If it's handled badly by Liberians, then it's on Liberians to fix it. It shouldn't be anybody. It should never, never give your sovereignty to anybody else. I think that the thought was, well, Liberia was created as a nation when there were returnees from Africa, and they, created the Republic of Liberia back in 1847 on my birthday, by the way. So you see, my connection is widespread.
It's deep, yep,
But
extends.
really, Americans don't see Liberia like Liberians see America. You have all sorts of nods to American heritage, and there are so many Liberians here who are professionals, who have names that don't sound particularly African,
Mhm.
whose accents might be a little identifiable if you're familiar with accents from the continent, which I am, but a lot of people aren't. They might think, oh, it must be from Barbados or Jamaica or somewhere, whatever. But a lot of Americans know Liberians, but they don't know them as Liberians. So as a result, they don't feel a connection to Liberia because Liberia is just another country to many Americans. We do have a connection, but Americans don't understand that. And it is incumbent on Liberians to make them understand that there is a connection between the United States and America, and it's not just that flag. It's not just Maryland fried chicken. It's not just the city of Buchanan, and none of that. It's because we do have some shared history. So I think that's important to impart. But it's also important that Liberians stand up. There's a lot of you here. And if you can have some unity, I realize that there's separation ethnically, always is the case. You know that's here too, right? We don't have tribes.
Absolutely.
People here, I was born in Washington, D.C., which is in the South. It's below the Mason-Dixon line, which is the line between Delaware and Maryland. So I was born in the South. My father's from South Carolina. My mother's family is from Virginia. My wife's family is from North and South Carolina. We eat Southern, we think Southern, we act Southern. But if you talk to people in Mississippi or Alabama, oh, you're not Southern. You're from the North. I said, look, don't insult me. I'm not a Yankee. I'm a Southerner. I think Southern. I eat Southern. Don't do that. That's to me an insult. And people from New York or New Jersey tend to look down on people who are from rural areas, particularly in the South. So that's a form of tribalism that we have. We also have a color thing, which is not as prevalent as it used to be when I was growing up a long time ago. It's still there. Don't think it isn't. Where light-skinned people and darker-skinned people, have these issues among them, and it's not always light-skinned people discriminating against dark-skinned people. Sometimes it's the other way around, where dark-skinned people think light-skinned people got breaks because of their skin color. So we have that whole ethnic thing going on. So we all have to get over that. We're all part of the greater African diaspora, and we have to find a way to work together. Because if you got Liberians and Rwandans and Nigerians and Kenyans and people from Namibia and Senegal, Ghana who live here to work together, how powerful a policy could we press on the government of the United States? Because we would all be voters, we would be contributors, we would be prominent people in the various communities. They'd listen to us. But as long as we act separately, it's not going to work.
So
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Go ahead, Felix.
go ahead, Mr. Winston.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just wanted to follow the discussion with this question. Frankly speaking, I think we've lost time. Right, next year is right here when it comes to the election, and we talk about voter educations and all of that, and that takes time. I don't think educating our community is something that can happen in the span of a month, 2 months. It takes several months, maybe years. That said, though, the election is upon us, and we are here talking about how to promote free and fair elections, but more so ensure the electorate has the know-how to make the right vote. So, given these dynamics, given this situation, press for time, the need to educate voters, the need to ensure free and fair elections, in your view, what one or two things do you see we could tackle that would be most impactful to a successful election next year?
Well, first of all, the plan, community outreach plan, is an ongoing thing, whether there's an election or not. And there may be in some places elections for governor or mayor or county council in what they call the off year, in between the national elections. That's number one. Number two, you need to do the community outreach plan quite apart from pure politics and elections to influence the people you live around to, feel that there's certain things that they need to do that would be beneficial to your community as Liberians, but your greater community in which you are part of. And they need to see you as interested in the local community. And if they see you as interested in part of the local community, they will be more likely to listen to you when you talk about the more international issues, because it's coming from somebody who was concerned about those potholes, who was concerned about those traffic lights that don't sync up, who was concerned about crime in the local area. If you care about them, they will care about you. In terms of elections, I've worked in politics a long time. Every 2 years we have national elections, presidential elections every 4 years, but congressional elections every 2 years. Do you know when they start running for 2024? In November of 2022. They're starting to think, okay, well, we lost this time. Who can we get to run next time? They will declare for, who's going to run in the fall, if not earlier, in 2023. Because the primaries in 2024 are early. Some of them start as early as February of 2024. So you have to get everything together before that in 2023. 2023 is a preparation year for the next elections, which is a presidential election year, which is even more powerful. So you have to be ready for the primaries. You have to have sessions where you talk to people about local issues but also national and international issues. You know, the money that the United States government spends on whatever the policy is on Africa is because of the members of Congress who vote on it. The president can say whatever he or she wants. It's the Congress, as they say, the president proposes, Congress disposes. So you have to get to these Congress people so that they're thinking, oh, they had some important elections next year, and Nigeria's having them, Liberia's having them, other places are having them. We need to pay a little bit more attention. Why? Because we have a lot of citizens here who are from there. They have families there. If there's a major problem, we're going to have to put in a lot of money on humanitarian assistance that wouldn't be necessary if the government is well run. Trade. I mean, we can do a lot of trade. In fact, before I left USAID, we were discussing a plan to jumpstart trade between Liberians and American business people. And in fact, I still have some hope of doing that. So if any of you, can point me to some of the business associations, I know a lot of the business associations here, particularly the diaspora ones, and we can try and work on a linkage. But I think that it is too late for this year, for this election, but it's not too late to start a regular process of community outreach, and it is enough time to do the kind of training that you talked about. I've done both voter education training. I've done political party training. I've done training of observers. It doesn't really take that long if you organize it right. I could do it in less than a day in any one place. Nowadays, you have people online, just like I'm talking to you online. I've done training online. I've done trade training online. It can be done or you can have somebody come over and do the training. All you need is the election law to take what I've given you and adapt it into a training manual. I've done it many times. It doesn't take that long.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much. And someone else?
I have a question.
Yeah, before you bring your question, I just wanted to just throw light on what I think regarding the time frame that we have. I think, like Gregory stated, how do we want to help the election? I think it's something that we need to be thinking about. How do we? Because it's not just it's something, I think it's in sections. How do we want to help? We can identify what we think the issues are. And Kari really pointed that out regarding voters' education. Are people really aware of the issues, or are they immune to the issues that they really don't care? What can we do as a people here in the diaspora? Because I know that Gregory has a length of experiences when it comes to building and developing such framework. However, we need to tell our story, maybe have a meeting and discuss how can we as people here on this call, who can we identify to join this group, whether we can work with him to develop a framework. I don't think it's ever too late. I've seen people plan for 2, 3, 4 years and still fail. And I've seen people plan for within a short time, especially when you're very specific. What do we want? How do we want to help? Voters' education, I think, is the main thing. I think sometimes people get immune to the system, to the issues, to any abuse or anything, just get immune because they're not looking at the issue. For instance, when I served as sales manager at Coca-Cola, the Lebanese had the price of ice so high. So if a boy that has his wheelbarrow with the Coca-Cola cooler in it and selling it, he buys a Coca-Cola from Coca-Cola, but then he goes out and get a very expensive ice. After he sells, there's no profit. And so we review, we went back on the drawing board. We said the issue here is cost of ice. And that was simple. So let's build an ice plant. And what we did at Coca-Cola at that time, we built the ice plant, subsidized the cost of the ice, and sell it to the marketing association, to these wheelbarrow boys. And everybody was happy. So the issue here is, I think how we really nail it is voters registration. Voters education. Education is the main key in this whole thing. that we can do. Reducing the barriers, the political barriers, reducing tribal barriers and whatnot, but voters education. Let's really think about how, not looking at what the challenges we had, the time frame, but if we all can put our resources together and look at voters education, and then have a plan in place, like having a Zoom conference, train the trainer, bring others that will come from Liberia, that will volunteer to go to different states. I know you all on this call already have individuals, young adults that you're working with in Liberia. And we can get in contact with the election commissioner, get their documents, or maybe online and see what they have. How can we pull that and use it and have people on Zoom from Liberia, people from England, in different countries within the diaspora, and see how best we can pull it and work with, I think, Gregory, and see how best we can assist within the short time frame we have. That's just my perspective.
Well, let me say that voter education is important, but if the registration of parties and candidates, if the delimitation of constituencies, if the the election rules are askew, it doesn't matter how much you know or what you want to do. You might not even have the chance to vote. You might have a situation in which, okay, they separate you so that instead of having a majority or near majority in one constituency, you're split up in different constituencies and your voice is weaker than it should be. So there's a lot, all of that stuff I talked about on the election process is important. Voter education is certainly important, but you have to have the process right in order for informed voters to express themselves effectively. I
Right.
think Emmerich had something.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Emmerich.
Professor Gaines, my observation during our electoral processes in our country, uh, since I started observing the elections of Liberia, one thing I noticed in the first round, we'll have a very high number of voters to the poll, but then most of our elections always go to the second round. So, how do you boost the morale, or the how do you motivate people to actually vote in the second round? In the first round, we see there's a fatigue with voters in the second round, so there's a huge drop.
Well, yeah, because voting is inconvenient, and if we had second rounds in the United States, you'd see voting drop too. People don't want to have to keep voting and voting. That's why election challenges are so difficult, because having built up to this election day, and now you say, okay, well, now you got to come and do it again. And then you say, well, there was cheating in that election, that second round, and we may have to rerun. Nobody wants to hear that. It's costly and it's time consuming. People have other things to do. Tomatoes are not going to wait for you to keep going to vote. You got to tend to them. Your store is not going to make any money if you're running out to vote every couple of weeks or so. So the best thing to do is to hold forums where the political parties are forced to express their what is your plan if you got elected, because a lot of these people are running for ego. They think, oh, I'm the best person to be president, I'm the best person to be senator, I'm the best person to be a congressman. Maybe not. Maybe you just don't know what you're doing. You just are doing that for your ego's sake. You have to bring that out so people are listening to them, and they say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I mean, not because this guy's in your ethnic group, but is he actually going to help you as a politician? And it isn't just sitting people down and said, okay, here's how the process works. It's doing the same kind of op-eds that we do here in America, in Liberia, so people can read it, or on the radio, or on social media, to talk about the issues so that people are informed about the issues. No sitting government is going to acknowledge that it's not doing everything that it can do. And every opponent is going to say, well, they failed, I can succeed. Well, how do you know? How do we know you can succeed? How do we know you know what you're doing? And is the government failing for outside reasons? Are they failing because they're doing the wrong thing, or they just are don't know how to approach something? This is where the diaspora comes in, working with people on the ground to express these things, to find the gatekeepers on the ground in Liberia who can provide these issues. Voter education can happen in the barber chair while somebody's getting their hair cut or their beard trimmed. The barber said, "Oh, the government is raising this tax for what? We're paying more and it's costing you more. That doesn't make sense. Where's the money going?" That makes people think, "Yeah, where is the money going?" So there's a lot of ways to do voter education all at the same time. And it doesn't always mean sitting people in a room or even online. There's just a lot of ways to do it if you plan it right. But you need to have a partner on the ground in Liberia who you trust, an organization that has a national scope that can make sure that all of these things, all of the registration of voters and parties, delimitation of constituencies, all of these things are put together right. They should have legal advice so they look at the election law and say, oh, no, 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 that's going to be a problem. And if it's going to be a problem, write about it, talk about it, get on YouTube or WhatsApp or LinkedIn or Twitter and talk about it. There are Liberians who are on social media. They'll see it. And in that way, you will be educating them about what the problems are. So after the election, when you say, well, look, this whole election counting and certification was set up wrong. We told you that in March. Now we got the election and you can see what the result is. People then would be less likely to say, oh, that's the sour grapes. You're just saying that because you lost. No, it's been a problem. I told you that 6 months ago. And now here we have it. You see what happened. So now is the time to pick your partner in Liberia to provide the funding from here, along with the funding for people there, to do the right thing and to start watching this process as soon as possible. Next month is Tuesday, but next month is not too soon to start this. So,
Madam
Any
Chair.
further question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, offer a comment there and something we can take note as we prepare to try to help our country. One, I will preface my comments by saying, um, I think a while back we talked about uh, law for country. The terminology wouldn't come to me now, but patriotism, right? and the like thereof that we see and experience as Liberians. And there's no shortage of criticisms that I find out there on social media, either that even in my personal social circles, of our government, of our country. And lately, I find myself on the side of not necessarily defending the current administration, but questioning people's criticism of our country and asking, well, what are you doing to fix it? Yeah, what are you doing to get in the fight? And I think that's where the rubber meets the road. And so, having listened to Honorable Simpkins here share several things that can make a difference. One of the things that came to mind is uh, finding out from the election commission, from the current administration, what's the budget for our elections commissions, right? To ensure all of the things that equate to free and fair elections are in place, like Mr. Simpkins just outlined. And I dare say we might find that commission is probably not fully funded or don't have the funding right to live out to what they need to do. And maybe through our connection over here, through our again, local leaders and um, uh, members of Congress, we could use our influence. That's one way, right, to ensure that body has the funding it needs to ensure free and fair elections. We could also use our influence to ask for election observers, right? Which hopefully that's being considered, but that's something we could look into doing. And lastly, we know a dollar or two goes a long way in Liberia, and so there are still opportunities to educate voters via radio ads, via pamphlets distribution. And I really love what Mr. Simpkins just suggested, making contact with a local organization that has a national reach and really working through them to reach the masses. And it doesn't take much. I think we can do it. So let's pencil that in for our working sessions.
Yeah.
But very great discussion. Thank you, Mr. Simpkins.
Well, you're welcome. I think just as you are the Liberian voice in America, that organization that you choose will be the diaspora voice in Liberia.
Yes, sir.
And they have to be somebody you trust, because USAID is in Monrovia is going to have a budget for the election. But they need to know from you, based on the research done by your partner on the ground, here's where the problem areas are. I remember back in an election maybe 15 years ago, there were parts of the rural areas where it's very difficult to get in and out of, to get the ballots in, to get the electoral workers in, to be able to get the votes out, and counted in a timely way. I think they had to airdrop some stuff in by helicopter. Well, those areas, you need to know where they are. You may not have somebody at every single polling place, but those polling places that are most contested, that's where you absolutely have to have trained, dependable people. And your local group on the ground might know better than you would here, but you have family and friends on the ground. We just can't afford to keep having bad elections on the continent, in Liberia or anywhere else. And the United States is not going to keep giving money to failed elections. They're just not. The second round, you don't get as much as you get in the first round. And people aren't really paying as much attention in the second round. And things can happen. So to the extent that you can have a successful first round, that is, that somebody gets more than 50%, the better. So I just urge you to start organizing right now, so that if there's any problems with any of those early parts about registration and constituencies, you can have a report that you can give to the U.S. government to say, here's some of the problems we see in this process. And maybe they will be addressed in advance of the election instead of waiting until after the election is over. I've been on a number of missions from the U.S. government, and usually it's late in the process. And some of the problems have already happened. And as I like to tell people, but I tell people, elections are not stolen just on election day. They're stolen months before that. Don't wait till the election is stolen and then cry about it. It's too late then. You need to work on it now. And, all of these early things that have to be done, if there's a problem, tell the United States, tell the EU, tell whomever is going to put money into the election process. Tell UNDP to see if they can help to ensure that ballots are delivered, that people are able to go in and out of these rural areas, these remote areas. There's still a lot of remote areas in Liberia, like there are in a lot of countries. Everywhere it's not Monrovia or Buchanan. Some of these places, it's hard to get. I've seen some roads in Liberia that was so bad it was ridiculous. And you can imagine trying to get in there in a truck. I've seen trucks turn like that trying to get down the road. I mean, it's just things like that you can deal with early on. If you wait till right before the election, there's really nothing you can do. But if you start now, a lot of these things can be corrected, or at the very least, the people who want to cheat know somebody's watching, which may make them more crafty, but at least it won't be so blatant.
Okay. Do we have any further questions? Anyone wants to chime in? Because I think this is so interesting. We've learned a lot, and
Is
some of
there
these
any
things
one of,
in 20.
sorry, Madam Chair, is there anybody on out there that has a question on Facebook?
Absolutely not. I don't see questions here and stuff. So
Okay.
put name.
Yeah, I think as we move on, when it's posted, people will
Yeah.
ask questions, and
Mhm.
that those questions will be brought back for
Okay.
the next discussion. I think this is a beautiful beginning, and I know that it's not every time that we start like in the process early, but if we plan better and have a framework in place, identify as Mr. Honorable Simpkins stated, we identify the areas as to where we want to help because we cannot do all, and identify the gatekeepers in Liberia. I think that would be helpful.
Hmm.
Our gatekeepers in
Absolutely.
Liberia, the Marketing Association, We Barber Boy Association, the barber shop, different communities, tribal groups, and talking to them, putting a framework in place. And then we are hoping that we can start this very soon. And I learned from one of our very good friend, a good friend of mine, and a very good friend of Ms. Honorable Simpkins, Dr. Arlen White, uh, that you are available to assist in this process. And as far as we're concerned, the Liberian View, we're willing to work with you because I think this is important. We want to see where, at least prior to the election, what can we do, especially when it comes to education and voters education. I know there are a lot of different obstacles, the roads, um, most of the areas they have wheelbarrow boys. Bike, tricycle, or by motorcycles. Traveling to those areas, maybe checking how many they have, who is doing that, the means of going to the rural areas. I mean, those are these are huge challenges that I don't know whether if we look at those things, whether the election will be feasible or whether maybe there's a means of polling people from various areas that we're not aware. But I think this team is resourceful enough, not only within the United States, but even in Liberia, that we can figure out and send people out to review those issues, and then maybe they can bring back some findings, and based on that, we can come up to say whether this is going to be a free or fair election or whether it's going to be more inclusive, especially those that have the right to vote.
And Madam Keir, just
Right.
quickly, not to prolong anything, for the sake of time, but I like what Mr. Simpkins said. I think the process should be void of trying to, because I know the suggestion was thrown to look at if the government's got a budget and institutions within there. I think we want to be smart about pouring resources into government that's contesting, right, and make it as independent as it can be, for the sake of attaining a purpose. Another thing is, in addition to looking at the groundwork and the results and the processes on ground, the diaspora is going to be a pivotal piece, as I say, and Mr. Simpkins said as well. We have to start looking at those issues, those red flags that are coming about. Religious is another one. So religious, now we see that there's some issue of potential, uh, you know, uh, you know. Uh, credibility issue, and then the voting system that supposedly is going to be used. People have some concerns about that, and so hopefully those are things that we can tackle from this end to be able to pivot into to be able to go into our process as well. So just to consider that and document and see how we can include it in any strategies we come up with.
I think that's very, very important, and I think we can start the ball rolling. And as I stated, we will be working along with Ms. Honorable Simpkins and see how best we can at least have a frame or structure in place, and also looking at which congressional team um, individuals that we need to reach up to, looking at our, like he well stated, our the various challenges, um, looking at the guidelines and looking at it and seeing whether it's mapped out in a way that it will be very transparent and finding some integrity in it, and then we can maybe decide when we're going to meet. But for the purpose of this particular discussion, I see Ms. Samuel Gibson. Before we go around and people can give us 2 minutes of their time, like a summary, and then Miss we give Honorable Simpkins the flow to just give us a closing remark. We will ask. I don't know whether Miss Gibson, do you have any question?
Yeah, Lucy, I'm so sorry that my my phone is not charged, and I did not even know that uh the mic was mistakenly on. But what I would like to say is that I've been listening for a little while, and that there there have been a lot of good points that have been stated, and but what I would like for us to do as a group, as a Liberian View, is to my concern actually is dealing with the youth. If we want to change the perspective of the electorates, if we want to change the dynamics of Liberian when it comes to elections, I believe and I'm convinced that if we start with the youth, educating them about the need, to be patriotic, educating them or making them aware of those things that belong to them through civic education, enlightening our children, the youth. I'm talking about those. Let's take it from sixth grade. Let them know about the country, that civic education, that love for country, patriotism that is not seen in our country nowadays. If we can do that, then we will prepare or will change the orientation of the children that are in Liberia now. We need reorientation of the youth to have the sense of belonging to our country, Liberia, knowing that they cannot be bought by giving them just little food, a handful of food or money. You know, how can we do this as a group in the diaspora to change the minds of our youth so that next time when a candidate is vying for a position, we'll be able to assess that candidate to know as to whether that candidate is the ideal candidate for us at the time.
Okay.
That's my own intervention I would like to give.
Okay.
And as I say, I'm sorry for the disturbance. I didn't know that my mic was mistakenly put on. But that's why I have to say, I think we
Okay.
should start working with the youth to reorientate them about the country that they are in,
Okay.
and
Thank,
incite in them patriotism. Thank you so much.
thank you so much, Salman. Thank you so much for
God is
that.
single.
It's well noted. during the planning section. We're going to take that into consideration. I think what you stated have been stated, and it shows that we all are looking at the same issues. So we want to say thank you. If you can mute yourself, that will be fine. So we're going to go to first Kawi. You can just sum up, take 2 minutes to sum up, and then we can leave from there. Later on, we will meet again to discuss next step.
Thank you, Madam Kear. And Mr. Simpkins, again, gratitude. And I want to say thanks for lending your voice and affording us the opportunity to share the same stage with you. Appreciate that. Thanks to the Liberian View, and thanks to all of those who, took out the time to be here. The issue of Liberia remains a critical part of, what we are. And as we leave, I guess the focus should be on how can we collectively use what we have to be able to impact change, effectuate change in Liberia. And that's the story I'm telling here, and just saying that from a diaspora standpoint, that there needs to be more engagement with voters in terms of the education piece. And I know the last speaker said it right. Young people make up the majority
Mhm.
of the voting population in Liberia. And interesting, they're the most marginalized. They're the ones that are facing high employment. They're the ones that are facing a lot of health, challenges in the country. And so voter education is going to be a key component. But in addition, making sure that we're spotting those red flags and using our influence to be able to bring them to the appropriate authorities as well. One final point, I think Mr. Simpkins said, the United States continue to remain a partner and interested in Liberia's progress. And we all know that a lot of the monies and resources poured into the government comes from our international partners. And I think that's going to be an area of opportunity for us to make sure that we are engaging them and just letting them know that this is in the interest of U.S. taxpayers' dollars as well, but also making sure that we're not creating additional problems that's going to end up being a future burden, future expense of the United States as well. But overall, I think this was a great conversation, and hopefully we can continue to dialogue on this issue. But it has been a wonderful experience, and I was, I'm happy that I was able to lend my voice. Hopefully, people have learned one or two things from here. But my lines are open, and hopefully, this is the beginning of establishing relationships that we can use going forward. So, thanks, Madam Kear.
Thank you so much. And so we'll gonna move next to Emmerich.
Oh, thank you, Madam Kier, for the opportunity again. Uh, Mr. Simpkins spoke a wide range of issues, and one thing I gather, the act of voter registration is not just an event. Okay, it has to be something that is continual from now going forward, even after elections, because you talked about it. When you have lost an election, you can just sit, you start preparing right away. So it's something that was valuable to me, and I think with this group is the beginning. We a lot we have learned that we can start to put into use, and be proactive to see how we can change the generation. They are young people. They are lagging behind in so many aspects, so many different things. Healthcare, they are behind, and the deplorable system over there, they are impacted. The unemployment rate so high, they are impacted. The substandard education, they are impacted. So we going to see how we can influence them through voters education. And if I will tell you this, it's a proud moment for me to share this platform with him, learning a lot. I have never ever been totally engaged, even though I do a lot, but the whole process of seeing how to start off with voter registration up to the process of people voting and beyond that. I think it's a never ending situation, in life. As long as we live, we should see, our generation improved, and that's the reason why we always have to educate people. Evolve, change. I mean, things change, so we always have to educate people the changes, to be able to relate to the changes and be able to adapt to the changes and be able to learn new things that, oh, what was good last year, or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, may not be good in 2 years. So we have to still educate people. It's a process that we're going to continue. I think I'm glad to be on to with Mr. Wilson. I'll be around to be on these meetings where we can sit as a team and work together. So thank you ever so much for the time and the opportunity.
Thank you so much. That was so well said. I think the two panelists, you guys really, really did well. I will turn it over to my colleague Felix to maybe say a few words before we can have our last word from our honorable Miss Simpkins.
Thank you, Madam Kear. I too, as a member of the Liberian View, want to say thank you to our dynamic panelists. I'm always excited when I see young men and women of Liberian descent so passionate about the causes
Mhm.
of our country and wanting to make things better. It bodes well for our future. And I also want to wholeheartedly thank Mr. Simpkins for gracing our platform with his presence, but most importantly, with some rare gems that we can use to move forward in a impactful and positive way. I want to just leave you with three thoughts. One, and I'm not just speaking to this platform, but to anyone who's listening, especially my Liberian brothers and sisters. Do not underestimate, let us not underestimate the potential of the people in country. There are some real brilliant minds back home locally that are doing great work. And we just need to find the time to find them and help support them and tag team with them, and we will make a big difference. The second thing is, and I thought we did an excellent job of it tonight, but it's also always important to highlight that is, and as we move forward, to always be careful to remain a neutral entity in our endeavors. We do not, as Madam Kia stated at the start, we do not support any one political idea or party, and we're here about Liberia and moving Liberia forward. And then lastly, just to remind us that this is hard work, right? It's not easy. It's the easiest part is sitting on this platform and talking about it.
Yeah.
But man, it's hard work. We got to roll up our sleeves. We got to find the time. And in America, you work for everything you earn. So we all have day jobs. Some of us, if not all of us have families. Kids in school. You name it. You know the challenges, bills to pay, but we still we're here because we love the country and we want to move it forward. And it's going to require sacrifice on all of our parts. And like I stated earlier this summer to a group of colleagues, the urgency of now is what we face in Liberia. Time is of an essence. Um, we're not here for long, and if we want to make a difference, if this is part of our calling, then we must act now. And so I encourage all of you. I am encouraged, and I
Mhm.
encourage all of you to hang in there with us, rally with us, and we will be able to make a difference. But it's hard work. It's hard work. We are here. We're committed to get it done, and we're asking anyone and everyone out there who wants to join us, please come. We welcome you. We welcome the diverse ideas. We welcome all disciplines, and as we always say in Liberia, in unity there is strength. And so, thank you. God bless you all.
Okay, thank you so much, Felix. That was well said on behalf of the Liberian View. And so we're just going to turn it over to our guest speaker to give a little summary or closing remark. And then the next voice you'll hear will be Lucy Wilson Kear, the host. Thank you.
Well, as has been said, I have given a wide-ranging discussion. So, what I would like to end with is addressing what the young lady said not too long ago when she talked about education.
Mhm.
That is partly a government function, in that the government runs the schools, and I think having an effective civic education component is required. I don't see that any party would have any objection to a nonpartisan civic education program that teaches young Liberians to be proud of being Liberian. However, let me point out that that's not the only way young people get educated. There used to be a cartoon that they had when I was younger, called What is a Bill? And it talked about the legislative process in the US Congress. Many, many years later, I still remember how they described it. So people in the private sector can do the same thing and produce um, media for children that they will be able to consume. Trying to teach a 6-year old, a 7-year old about um, political issues is a waste of time because they're too young to really understand it. General issues about who you are as a Liberian, who Liberia is as a country in Africa and in the world, that you can do. And so I think you would do that. As for the older young people who are going to vote, to be able to vote or will be able to vote soon, you can have youth organizations that
Mhm.
have candidate forums where they ask candidates and parties what their topics are, and you can prepare them for it by giving them some background on Liberia and some of the issues that face Liberia, so they themselves can come up with questions, and in that way, the young people will be able to educate themselves based on what they hear and also express their views to the people running for office. So that's my last contribution.
Okay, so we just want to take this time to say thank you so much. I think from this discussion, when we are now going to be thinking, what do we want to see in the election? How can we in the diaspora help the process? What can we do when it comes to voters' education, especially looking at the rules, condition? How can we reach how can we reach the Liberian population within Liberia? How can we reach, as Honorable Simpkins said, the gatekeepers, the barber shop, beauty salon, wheelbarrow boys, and the folks that are really, really the voters in Liberia, high schools, universities in Liberia within like the University of Liberia. So we're going to sit and find time, as Felix rightly stated. This is not the most common thing is for us to sit here and talk about the issues. But then the work here is coming together and developing a structure or framework as to the pathway towards how can we help during this whole process. We know that this is a continuous process, but what can we do now for 2023 is what we're looking at. So if you're on Facebook, you're watching, we just want to make sure that we are aware, we are involved, we're engaged, and this is the time that we have to vote Liberia, not tribe, not political affiliations, but then what Liberia really need is what we're looking at. So this is the end of our first episode when it comes to the role and impact of the diaspora Liberia's 2023 elections. And so, Mr. Gregory Simpkins, we want to say thank you so much. We're looking forward to working with you. What all Dr. Allen West stated about you, your experiences, your being so receptive and everything, and the wealth of information you have. You've already shared it, and I'm hoping that our viewers will look at it. We're looking up to questions, we're looking up to suggestions, and your concern, any red flag that you see that is foresee when it comes to this election 2023, put it in the chat. Let us know, and we'll for sure come back and have a second phase of this discussion. For now, we want to say thank you to our audience and goodbye for now. Thank you all.
Thank you.
This was in partnership with the Liberian View. We will be joining you next Saturday for an episode of Unapologetic. My name is Duke, and until next time, you'll have a good day. Bye.
Ode Liberia this, Liberia that. Nípa